And that is always longer than I remember. Every time. Like, note to self, redo that video. That's just too long, isn't it? It's like a good minute.
I quite like it when the scratching comes in, where it gets all sort of like hip hop-tastic.
I'll make something new this weekend or this week, whenever I'm not busy. So welcome, anyone joining us. Today I'm joined again by the wonderful Jim Seconde. Seconde. And we are back to the football API, basically. So last time we did some data modeling. That was a lot of fun. Since then, we have had Jim working hard building an OpenAPI spec, starting the spec. So we're going to scaffold out Laravel API now so that we can do some magic. And thank you, people, for joining us. Awesome to have people here. And obviously, I am using PHP Storm, which means that when I open up this lovely, lovely OpenAPI spec, I can flip it over to see this awesome interface by Redocly. It's got settings. What can I do with settings? Ooh.
Yeah, so it's I only discovered this once they'd started rolling out the new UI, and I don't know when it came in, but yeah, if you're in PHP Storm or if you're in any IntelliJ, sorry, not any JetBrains IDE, if you open up an API spec file, it's got Redocly baked into it, so you have like
really
a
nice
live renderer.
So when we log in, you're sending the user ID and password.
Yeah, so to start at the top, there's from starting authoring this, there's a lot of things that have come up, just to give us sort of a background of it, like that we can discuss in this, which are interesting. First of all, true API first driven design is probably not like completely possible, as we'll see, because error handling in Laravel, you really want the spec. You don't want to define exactly what the format of the error message that comes back if you've got a 422 where something can't be processed, because Laravel's automatically generating it for you and then we'll spit it out. So really you're just like, well, if it's going to spit it out, then I just want the spec to say what will come out. So it's a bit like there's some things like that. And starting at login, you can tell that I do OpenAPI work far too much at the moment. I can't do it via Redocly. I have to view it in code. So
fine, here you go.
As an example, so bear in mind for everyone, because this is the API, the login is not a Laravel path to login. That's not what it's doing. It's going to be taking a security token, and it's going to try and log you in for your React Native app.
So this part, shouldn't that be email?
Yes, it should be. Actually, have you got? Can you start? I did use this in the early days. Can you start a collaboration session in PHP Storm so I can join it? And then I can just start doing. Have you used this before?
Not for a while.
I think it's well. I'm not going to delete anything off your machine, but when you say full access, I can have access to your command line and stuff. It's quite mad. Has it sent it right? So it's a session link. So if you send it to me on Slack,
I've sent it on the private chat through here. Hopefully you should have that. See, what I usually do is actually use Tuple, because it's a little bit easier.
Oh, 364 meg of a client, which is now launching.
Oh, that might take a while.
Anyway, yes. So one thing to bear in mind when I say user IDs, and also I've violated my own principle there. I'm using everything in snake case for this. For keys that are going back and forth in the API.
Okay.
When it comes to labeling things, I've done it in camel case. So if you look at the operation IDs that I've got individual keys, they're like login request there is done the way
in a little bit.
I like it.
So if I compare that to what I've got going on so far, I'm accepting an email and a password. No, you're not coming in. So email and password, both type string, all good. Response what you're expecting or saying I should be returning here is a user ID. What I'm actually returning is a message and a token.
Okay, cool.
So in terms of what is needed, do you want to make the changes to this?
So we've got, so it's let me look at Laravel, right? It's email, which is a string, and then a password, which is a string, which is a raw password. Both of those are required. Yep. The responses are not reused in the OpenAPI way. We'll get onto how you do reusable objects and things. So what comes back is
basically it is an array, and inside that array, or an object in reality, it'll have both message and token. Message will be a string, token will be a string.
Message, token, schema, yes. Type, object, properties, message. What is a placeholder for the message?
Authentication successful.
Okay. Can that be enummed? No, we'll leave that so that it's kind of type string. Cool, and then we've got a token.
Yes.
Which will need the client to consume that. Store it somewhere.
Yeah, and that'll just be some random old string.
What I have is I'll tell you what, I've got in the background for a lot of the way I've been generating this, I've got the online UUID generator for all of the IDs. And then for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck something into base64.
That'll do it. I mean, I'm pretty sure it uses SHA-256 under the hood, but, you know, yeah. Bakers can't be choosers. Hey, Daryl, thanks for joining us, buddy. We are on an adventure. So while James is doing his thing, I'll explain this. So this expanded response was something that I needed at work. This is a package that I released at Treble called API Responses. And what this does is you take in a message and an array of data, and it'll turn a JSON response like this. So you can literally pass whatever keys within that array, and it kind of flattens it into the parent with a message at the top. Just really a helpful way to kind of standardize the API responses there.
That's quite nice. I every single time I have to take a moment, at least like a minute every time I see the splat operator being used to try and understand the context. Yeah. I can't stand the splatter operator. Sometimes you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And sometimes you're like, what is it doing?
It is occasionally useful. And then this uses a header factory, which gets configured default headers and any potential headers that you pass through. So what you can actually do there is, I believe, no, I haven't set this up to accept the headers, but if I wanted to, I could extend upon it. But hey, that is login now, pretty much good to go.
Well, so that's okay. That's the login method. So now we've got our two errors, which are distinctly different.
Yeah. So bad request. This is where it's the error handler that would handle it.
So the bad request is you have given me a a user, as in an email, that is an integer, or you have not included a password field, or you've given me rubbish and I can't even process this.
See, that would hit the validation by default in Laravel.
Which is why, if you, I'm ahead of you in the game. If you scroll down on the API request, you'll see I've put a comment in there.
Change this to Laravel default
to default verification things. So it says it's something like that, isn't it? Like missing fields, and then it says something.
Yeah. Let's test. Let's create a
for the benefit of people watching as well. Can you just say what the tool is you're using?
No. I am using check the URL and try again. I am using HTTP Pi desktop.
That's it,
super
HTTP
awesome.
Pi.
Yeah, super awesome. Accept application JSON. Okay, so I can't remember the root name now. Typical.
Have you got API in the?
Let's just login,
Okay.
not auth. Okay. So this is where we hit the first potential bad request. At the minute, it's saying a 500.
That's definitely not a 500. That is a client doing something wrong.
So that is our first change. So that'll be the device aware middleware. We should be throwing that with a bad request status. So the reason for this is that we use X touchline ID header from the device to create the API token. So the way that this works is we're not going to have a web interface. It's just going to be mobile clients. And you could log in from multiple devices and you want a API token per device in effect. And it will store that API token against a device ID so that when you want to manage your API tokens, you can kind of disconnect other sessions by deleting a token from a different device in a roundabout way. So this is saying a 500.
So this is where the errors from the OpenAPI spec is quite. So I have to try and think about what this should be. So I would say this is going to be, if you haven't included the token in the header.
Yep.
Then it's an authentication problem. So it's 403, which is that this action is forbidden. That's what I'd say it is.
I mean, you can do.
It has to be. It has to differentiate. At the moment, the API spec says that 422 is that you cannot authenticate, which means that either the email or the password is incorrect. We obviously don't say which one is incorrect because people will hack it. So, so that's what it is at the moment.
Yep.
And 422 unprocessable entity. It's not normally you get these with creating entities when you're doing CRUD operations. So you're doing a post to make a user or something like that. But in this case, I think it fits quite nicely.
So we've got a 422 description cannot authenticate, message and detail cannot authenticate user, one or more field values was incorrect. So if I come over to here and add the X line ID, and I'm just going to do a random UID style thing. Unprocessable content. So the message is the email field is required and one more error. Then you got an errors object with a key and an array with a value. I don't like the way that works, but sometimes there's multiple things wrong, I suppose.
Okay, so it's message and errors. So there's errors. The message is, let's just take that for example. I'm
gonna find you. Where's Jim? Come back, Jim.
Oh,
there you are.
I'm doing. Are my changes happening? Yes, they are. Right. So instead of detail, it's going to be errors, which is a. Is it an object or an array?
It's an object. And that has properties. This is where embed all the things. So this is where it will have dynamic properties. This one will have email and password as properties.
Okay, so that means these will be marked. Well, we haven't required is message and errors for the parent node here, so we'll just leave out required because that means that you get renderers for OpenAPI that when they give you examples of the responses, you'll have to specify required and then it will say that will come back. In this case, if I leave it, it does say these things are optional. So properties are email.
Yep. Which is an array.
Is it an array?
Yeah.
Can I have a look at the response again?
Strings.
Oh, an array of one thing. Give us generics. Type example, and the example is the email field.
The email field is required.
And if we're going to do password, it will be the same
thing for password. Yeah, because it could be multiple things, multiple reasons it's failing that validation in effect. Follow Jim. I want to follow Jim. There he is.
Okay. Oh, you can click on the thing and it follows you. It's really so when you open up another file, it automatically just takes you to what I'm doing, which is quite fun. Right. Yeah. So that's the example. I think it only needs the example. We don't need to enum this or something like that. But is the okay? Does that match?
The email field is required. Password field is required. I would say yes.
Full stops, really important. Because then we're not matching what the API is doing. Cool.
Yeah.
So that's the validation. So now we need to go on to this 403, which is what we've picked if there is an error with the header.
So if I don't send that, at the minute it's doing a 500 internal server error with an exception stack trace. However, I do need to change that. So the way there's nice ways to override the exception handler in Laravel, and there's horrible ways, and there's no middle ground. You either override all of them or none of them, and it's an absolute pain.
Well, when it comes to error handling, we're going to need for individual endpoints for entities. We're probably going to need custom error handling anyway.
Yeah, 100%. So I actually built a GIST.
So this is quite a good example of where we can't solve it now in the amount of time that we've got, but this is part of the API first, where I'm thinking of it from the API where any client should be connecting. In this case, it will be a React Native app. But what happens if they want a desktop app and they create an Electron one is if you don't send me the header, I am going to give you a 403. You are not permitted to try and complete this action. Laravel is not doing that, which means that the code has to, this is API first development in action where you then have to refactor the back end to do what it should do. So it's quite a good example of that, in effect.
We've got the render there. So what I'm going to do is if it's a validation exception, leave a standard.
Oh, I didn't realize you were going to do this in time. Working at breakneck speed.
It's okay, I've got a gist. A gist.
Oh, you've already done it. Oh, I'm not going to say what word I can see.
Which one? Final. My favorite word. So.
Oh, no. Not getting involved in that.
Do it. Have the final say. We need to pull in the error code. We're going to return an error response. Import this. Right, so let's just clean it up. Let me close some of this down. So there we go. And import that. Okay, so that isn't actually a Symfony request. This is going to be a wrong one. My bad. This is going to be a Laravel request.
Does it still extend off a Symfony request? I can't remember.
It does, but you don't have the same method.
Okay.
Then in here, I basically just need to do this. So my handler.
It's worth also noting that this had to be custom anyway, because if you don't send it, it's then giving like a stack trace. And I know technically, we'll have some sort of like generic error page, but if you forget somehow and you code it and someone's like, yeah, but you're never going to code it so that there's the React Native app is always going to send the header, and you're not thinking outside the box in terms of security, and you don't actually put a generic error page for a case like this. You're like, oh, I'm now exposing my app. Hey, Chris.
So the way this works is when we try to render the exception, if it is an instance of a validation exception, just handle it the way that you default do it in Laravel. Just handle it that way. I don't want to override it. All good. If it isn't, then we want to tap into the API handler, which will then map the exception and the request, and then return a response. So let me walk through that code. What this will do is it will match the not found exception by default to not found. Anything else will be an internal server error. And then it will return an error response with an API error where the title, detail, instance code, and link are all done. And the status comes from error, get description, and status, all kind of built into a package in the background. So what this is going to do now, internal server error, we must identify that. So what this is actually throwing is a forbidden. So if exception is instance of device identification exception, we can use the error code for forbidden, which means that we now get that.
It's quite
boom.
It's quite nice that. Right, I'm just gonna do this. You must identify your device with the. I can see what you mean. It's like it's a bit hacky, but at the same time, it's quite a nice implementation of it.
Yeah, basically, you're mapping exceptions to status codes, and the status codes are kind of pre-built. So if I show you, like, the error code, for example, it's an enum in an error code package, and it's got a title, a code, a link, and a status by default. You just pass the description, and the link goes to the Mozilla docs so that you can understand what that status code actually means. And it's got a lot of them in there.
I'm a big fan of using all of the constants for codes and requests and things like requests.
Yeah, it's just a big enum with an attribute that has been filled out by default. So yes, you can override, you can find your own, but it just works for me. And it's a like, if you look at the headers, you should be getting that's content type application JSON. That is not what I want to be doing. What I want to be doing is that is not going to let me pass that through, but API error isn't either. So on the handler here, that's going to give me that request. Headers. Add a header. Add. That is what I need to do. That's complaining. So maybe I will.
I think on the security section, yeah, we'll see how I structure this in the security schema. At the moment, it's just a bearer token that's defined. But if we have, as it's a custom header and it's X touchline ID, we'll need to actually define that. Can you just leave that up for a sec? I'm almost there. Oh, that's detail. Okay, so
yeah. So title is like the system style message. Something that you can map to is pretty static. It's going to match the status code. Detail is a human readable aspect. Instance is where it happened. Code is a kind of unique HTTP code where you can maybe look it up in the docs. And link is a link to what that error actually means.
Okay, so let's move the instance up. I'll use the request. I'll use the example given there. I mean, we don't care in the OpenAPI spec. It's an example.
Let's go follow you again.
So touchline dot test. I don't know / something. Can you go back to the?
Yeah.
You need to flick between both.
Let me drop it in the private chat for you. That link. That is just the URL I use, or that OrbStack generates, basically.
I love the fact that it's got a link in there for you to just. We have this at work where when we we're responsible for big APIs, so having custom links to actually document stuff when it gets thrown is kind of like really important. Let's say I'm just going to copy it myself. So HTTP 403. If I type in 403, that should take me straight to Mozilla docs. Mozilla, please hire your docs team again because it was really good. They laid loads of them off like 4 years ago, and it was a really bad idea.
Really, really bad idea. The Moz docs are like the best docs I've ever used for anything.
Yeah,
Anything
Mozilla and Stripe are your two golden standards, depending on what you're looking at. Okay, so I think that is it. So if we now go back to, the rendered Open API, it will look nice.
OpenAPI.
Remember when you do the rendering, this gets me every time. You have to refresh it. Otherwise it won't pull them in. Have a look, see if it's rendered in bad request. Yes, is that right? I think you might need to re-render it.
Now let's test it. Sponsors, bad request. Errors. Array of arrays. If
you click on it, do you get an example? So for anyone that's not that familiar with OpenAPI, like the capabilities of it, the point of having examples in there, although it's not rendered because this is documentation where it's just pure documentation. If you brought this into Postman and you were developing for it, you can then fire up. I say Postman, you can do it on anything now. You can do it on Stoplight, or you can do it on Insomnia. Hit mock server, and it will just pretend that you have like a live backend. And the ability to do that is just amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah. So there is a way you can define what's in the array, but we won't worry about that right now.
Yeah, we'll get to that if we need to do
Bad
a sort
request
of
works. Header error, that works.
Oh, sorry, no, there's some required in there. So everything in there is required. So you'll have the title, the detail. It's going to be in there. So we need to tell the developers it will be.
Everything will be in there.
Code link. Cool.
Re-render. Ta-da! And then the cannot authenticate is.
So that is when that. So this is you have given me something that is wrong. Username doesn't exist. Password doesn't exist.
Bad request. It's never going to throw that. That is the 422 cannot authenticate.
What bad request?
Yeah, where there isn't a scenario where that happens.
Are we lumping them in with the same thing? Because a bad request is, to me, they're two different things. A bad request is you gave me a email address and it's an integer, or you did not give me.
Yeah, that by default Laravel will handle that and just throw it as a 422 because it's failing potential validation criteria.
So actually, if I just remove the 422 that's in there and then change the 400 to a 422, that will sort it.
That will do it.
Cool. Let's do that.
And while you do that, I'll have a look at the other parts of the API you've got going on. Get user.
We are looking at the moment. We'll start with just users. We'll have, we've got more complexity in the app, like attaching profiles later.
Yeah.
So what I've done for, if you look at the code, this is the first kind of lesson in scalable OpenAPI development, really. If you go to the,
how about I follow you and you take us there?
And then scroll down to. Why is it
not working? It's frozen for me. Give me a second.
It's saying you've got a modal open on my end. I don't know why. Have you got a modal open?
No. It's frozen. This is what you get for using. Now following you. Sorry.
We're trying to be too fancy with all this, like these
Java errors,
JetBrains things. Right. So this is an example of how I've started coding it. You can see that there's a reference there for the schema of when this is to create a user, and there's a user object. So what I've been doing is right at the bottom of the document is where you specify components and you specify custom schemas. So what I'm doing is coding out things like users and teams and clubs as entities that I would expect to get back from the API, and that differs from what is expected and how the backend is going to handle it, because we're going to use probably things like DTOs or resource transformers and things like that.
Yeah, because then what it allows you to do from an OpenAPI perspective is, if you're returning a list of users, you could just use that one component and say, I'm returning a list, and each item should conform to this schema.
Yeah.
If you're returning one, you can just say, I am returning this schema, and it allows you to be really kind of strict. And
in effect, I mean, it really is sort of it's coding in sort of domain-driven design type thing, really. So an example of this, I haven't got round to. That's a good example there of a GET request where we're going to, there's things like I haven't formed the pagination requests, which will use Hateos, because we're going to use Hateos properly, because doing REST without Hateos is half-baked, is my worst nightmare. So I haven't done a GET request where it's an array of user objects, which it will be, and then there'll be pagination. There'll be HAL tools at the bottom. But an example of this, for instance, is I want to create a user. So I've got a post. I will get a 201, which is created, and I will get back the user object that I've just created. That user object is a dummy object, and it's defined multiple times. So if you scroll down to going to get a user, it's exactly the same. So if you go to the path is users/ID, there we go.
You'll get that user object, and that user.
And there we go. Because when you create it, you get the entity back, and when you get it, you get it back. Now,
and obviously this isn't the final form.
These ones here are really how we want the front end to consume it. The ID I've given as a UUID, I've just called it ID. You can transform it. We're obviously not going to give out the ID for the database, because never do that, please. And this is taken from the Figma document that we had, where the application owners, like the product owners, if you like, sketched out kind of what fields they expect to see. We're having to translate that technically in some cases. Like, for instance, a lot of it says location. Location doesn't mean anything. Country does.
Yeah.
Postcode. You might know the answer to this, Steve, having been in the armed forces. I tried to go for the armed forces postcode because I know that, like, it's never a valid, it's not a real postcode, but it is a real postcode. Was it ZZ?
BFPA.
What is it?
British Forces Post Office.
Okay. For some reason I thought maybe Z is like Shetland or something, but you don't want to give like a real postcode. I mean, you can do it, doesn't really matter. I mean, I gave a real football club, so you'll see that if you scroll down. Important. Oh, here's a really good example of API driven design here. So the date of birth field. They wanted the owners, the product owners wanted to specify that it is just the month and the year. The original developers of this did not know how to handle date time at all. They actually tried to sort of convert it from the front end on the fly, and it was just a mess. That is a date in the database, and it will be the 1st of the 7th, 2001. And how we store it, and all we're going to do is transform it as it comes out using Carbon and output in this format. Really, really simple. But this is an example of that's what the API is going to output. We know how we're going to do it. It's going to be like, in a resource layer, it's going to then transform it. So that date of birth field is kind of a good example of that.
Yeah. Then we've got an email. Player object is going to return stuff. That will return an image.
So I've given just generic S3 paths as the
ID will be.
By the way, if in case one of the did you get to see the video that we did internally, Steve?
Not yet. No, I've been
just so you know, it is actually the relationship between users and players and things like that is very simple at the moment. You have two types. You have an administrator who puts together everything, and then you have a fan who logs in. So at the moment, we don't have a player that logs in. What happens is a team owner creates a player object and attaches it, and then puts all their images and stuff like that. We've not got to the point where we can open. We're going to structure it in a way where we can get players to log in, join their own teams, but that's not in scope for this at the moment. And you'll see that from the players' endpoints.
I think the code with me in the latest early access is maybe broken. There we go. So basically what we've got is different types: fan, manager, sponsor, player. So what you mean is that role-wise, a user can be a fan or an admin.
Yes, just that for the moment.
And only admins can create clubs or accounts.
Yes.
And an account.
So the good news is the way it's been structured with the enums already is that when we're ready to go, we can then, you've actually built out the roles, so we can do that. But for the time being, the player is a dumb object. It's just attached to a team, a club, etc. And it's created by an admin, a team admin. So it's quite simple at the moment, but when we're ready to refactor it, it will work quite nicely so that, I can log in, I can send a request to join this team, then an admin can accept it. That's what we'll get to once we get past the MVP for this.
So a user has their role. They also have an account.
Just to answer your question, Nathaniel, it's not going to be open source. You get to see it being developed, but the code is owned by Touchline Tech, which is the company.
Yes.
So it just means you have to keep on watching our videos over.
Pretty much. So say I'm a club owner. I create my account. I am then an admin. I then register my account, which has a type, and that type can be a
cool.
Check. It can be a fan, a manager, a sponsor. It can't be a player or a sponsor, basically. It's a fan or manager, basically. You create your fan account or you create your manager account, and managers are able to create clubs. Fans are not, in effect.
That's correct.
So then a user has a profile which contains the username, phone, and user ID. We also need to make sure that we add like date of birth and stuff to this. So if we stop talking about OpenAPI for a sec and focus more on the kind of what we've learned from a data perspective, I will need the OpenAPI open at some point. Let's keep it there for now, and we're going to open up the database migrations profiles table. It's frozen again because of code with me.
I might, whilst you're coding it up at the moment, I might actually leave it so that it stops freezing your machine.
That could be useful. It's not a resource thing because I mean my Mac is, pretty good.
No, it's probably my internet connection, but because it tunnels in and gives you access to everything, it's holding up the host. So
this is why I typically use Tuple, because it doesn't have that problem. So a user, that is done. Country is handled through this foreign relation here, LC country, which is a database package that I pulled in. Postcode is postal code, got that. Date of birth is a date, which is fine. phone. We only care about mobile, really, don't we?
Yeah, there's no point. So the reason why I changed it from mobile to phone was for that exact reason.
Okay. So what we also need, I need to move that.
And the phone number is going to be really, really great because, you know, we can wire it up so that if someone scores a goal during a match, then, for instance, the manager can be notified by, say, a API communications platform that can send text messages.
By default, marketing is set to false, so it's popped in. So the only thing we need to do there is have a look at the profile factory, make sure that we add, I've already done.
As it is currently being discussed in Laravel land, which I find quite interesting. My last employer at Jump24, we had sort of a structure for the way that we dealt with things like this. But at the moment, migrations down are causing a lot of opinions to be thrown about. Have you seen this?
No, I've heard it spoken about before, and I think it was mostly, it came off the back of Sparsely, who removed the down migration from their stubs, basically. Reason, not 100% sure.
I think that there's the implication that if something goes wrong in the chain of how the migration is supposed to work, you suddenly start deleting stuff you shouldn't. I mean, the way we handled it and the way I still handle it is just treating a migration as completely atomic. You know, it's all or nothing. You know, it's either there or it's not, and therefore your down needs to handle exactly the same functionality. But it also checks that checks before it starts doing stuff that the table is there or the field is there.
Store date, marketing done, date of birth done, user ID good. I'm going to ignore the country.
Also worth noting, I love the fact that I can watch you work and just think of all of the things that popped into my head when doing this. If you're wondering exactly what's going on top of the fact that Steve is just doing the migrations, do you know what? It was only about 4 years ago, I think, professionally, that I then started working with factories and fixtures that are just auto-generated using Faker. And once you've done it, you do think, how on earth did I ever work with this before? And the answer is usually like importing. Oh, I'm going to import. This is what we did in the job ages ago, actually, which is like, you know, you have a file, you have like a SQL file like on your machine, and you have to keep on importing it, and it's like a copy of UAT where someone has hacked together the data. Just use fixtures. It means that, and if you don't know what they mean, it means that Laravel will handle you in a test saying, I want to test that I'm going to get this entity back from Eloquent. Right, well, clear the database. Now just put something in there, and it will resolve, as long as you've coded it right, it then resolves all of the relationships it will have that you want out of it, and then you can check if it comes back. I mean, not doing that will cost you a lot of time. The stage that it got to with the music industry startup we were at was that UAT problem where we just had to keep on importing UAT. It was too late. The app was too big to deal with fixtures. If you don't bake it in from the start, then you're basically stuck with a tech debt problem to fix.
So we've got an option here for the postcodes because it's UK only, right?
It's a debatable one. I mean, technically, it doesn't have to be UK only at all.
I don't remember the name of my package.
Is this going to have the UK regex, which is incorrect from the government?
Hey, no, it's a postcode IO, and what it does is you can just basically, it'll validate that it's an actual postcode.
Martin
it
does
have fallback regex.
Martin is trolling me, sorry, in the chat saying you BBC style advertising rules other SMS API providers. You'll notice I haven't said where I work because I'm doing that on purpose. But I mean, there are others, or you could use one that, you know, you could talk to me about where I work, and then I'll say, just use our one. It's good. But I'm an advocate, so I have to be kind of neutral on streams.
So do we want to do proper postcode validation or not?
I think I don't. For the moment, I don't think so. I think in the future it would be handy. I mean, you could do. You know, there's real sort of phase 3, phase 4 type things where you could do a location lookup, geolocate for, you know, where's my nearest match or something like that. If you don't like, if you're a fan and you don't know which grassroots team to support, it's be some quite cool features. But
choose none. Okay, so mistake number 1. Called it phone, not mobile. So we've got a username, a mobile, a postal code, that's an integer, I believe. Oh, it's frozen again.
That was not me this time.
No, it's not you this time. I think it's me. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quit that. Reopen it. Here it comes. Maybe. Where are you?
Drum roll.
Get a safe no. Open up standard PHP Storm.
Computers are a mistake.
Damn computers.
Have you got Laravel IDEA installed on this?
No.
Okay. I don't use it at the moment. I had a trial for it and it was all right. It was okay, but trying to get Java under the hood in the IDE to try and read like late static binding and stuff for facades, it just really didn't like it. They've had a crack at it, and it is useful, but you know it costs money as well.
So this is mobile. Apparently, it didn't save everything that I just did. It's a pain. So we've got username, mobile, postal code. We can add that up here. Property. Wrong hotkey. Then we've got an integer for this. Add in that. Marketing Boolean. This is how I do Laravel.
That makes sense to me. You've got start off with everything fillable and then invert it for when you want to start protecting stuff. But when you want to protect stuff, you've then got to think of the abstraction between, you know, the database layer and the resource transformers. So yeah, there's some things. I think in this case, particularly as we're in a profile, when you're in profile and you're in users, you're going to need to be very, very careful about. That's where you are going to have to consider guarding because you've got PII in there, and you really just want to make sure every single step of the way you're not releasing that out into the wild. Otherwise, you're in big trouble.
It just completely removed what I just did because it loaded stuff from memory. Thank you very much. Marketing. And we've got a property, which is a nullable carbon instance for the date of birth. We have a user ID, blah, 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 blah. All good. Awesome. Date of birth is going to cast it by default to date time, and the format will be year month.
Yay.
So we don't have to do any sort of messiness. And no, we don't do model on guard here. We do it properly. I'm just going to throw that one out there.
Model on guard. I can't get at my data.
Just
just let everyone have everything. It's fine.
add what you like. We'll hope for database errors.
You jest. I've worked at places that do that. It's not for any Laravel people. It's not Jump24 because they're a Laravel partner.
So let me just scroll back down. Responses, responsive stuff. So next up, what do we have? We've got a user. So what we're going to need is a resource, really, for a user.
Yes, and as a last thing before I go, because I've got an 11:30.
Acceptable.
There was a package. There was a package that's probably. I mean, it would definitely still be maintained, which is really nice. It's like a sort of a. It's like a middleware that goes on a model that really just transforms the database ID into a unique UUID. That's not just a UUID out of the. It's not just something encoded from the database ID, and it's sort
you're about hash ID.
Yes, I think that rings a bell.
Yeah, I'm using like ULIDs, which is the same as UUID, but it's not unique lexicographic something.
There is when it comes to being able to when it comes to uniqueness, the one thing I will say is the events in this app are going to be there's going to be a lot of them, and we're going to be using event sourcing for it, which means we're then going to need to install some fancy packages and probably some cool tooling, like Algolia or whatever it's called and things like that. That means we're going to have a massive table of events, which are going to need to be indexed properly. So massive tables, if you just use UUID, even 1 or 4, it doesn't matter. If there's not going to be actual proper uniqueness, we're going to run into trouble. So something to consider when we do it. So whilst you continue, thanks again for adding me on, Steve. I've got to get
that is okay.
Another cup of tea, and in the meantime, as the day goes on, more things will magically appear in the OpenAPI spec.
Yeah, I'm not going to be too much longer on this anyway, so it should be okay.
If anyone wants tips or has got anything they want to discuss regarding OpenAPI spec, it's basically my speciality. As all the OpenAPI specs for my company are all online. It's something that I had to learn from scratch very, very quickly. And it can some people like to make it very, very, very granular, where you can get schemas of like snippets and insert them. And I think, to me, that seems a little bit over-engineered. You want it to be readable. It's a human readable spec that is also readable by machine. So you'll have a balance between both. But thanks, Daryl. See you later, everyone. Do you want to boot me off, Steve?
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
See you later, mate. So it's just me again. What I'm going to do, I'm going to focus in on the code for this last part. So at this point, what I want to do is don't want to inherit. I'm going to add it in here. So authorization, we're going to use a bearer token, and we're going to pull that from token. Hidden mistakes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so X touch line ID is equal 5. And we've got our first user record back. So that, I believe, is coming from the roots auth sanctum here. So this is the last thing that I'm going to do before we bid each other adieu. I'm going to keep it like this for now. But this request user here, I want to return a new model response. Its model response should receive some data, which would be a new user resource. that resource is going to be that. So there we go. That is how it should be formatted. We will have an ID, which is a user identifier, type for the user's attributes. So we've got the name, we've got first, last, and full. Email address, email column, the property, which is an object, which will have an address, which will have the email address, and then a verified marker to say whether it's been verified or not. We can then add the role, which is admin. And what I want to be able to do is maybe say include profile. And then this should return profile and a link to that profile itself. So I think that should be enough for now. Before Jim does too much, because we are both working on the main branch right now, I'm just going to commit all of this. Doing Scream stuff with Jim. So we've done the API handling, we've done some OpenAPI modeling, we've now looked at how we're going to handle a lot of these things. Next time, I think we're going to focus more on the API so we can catch up with Jim, who seems to be trailing ahead with a lot of his OpenAPI, so I don't want to cause a blocker for myself. We've done the login. He hasn't done the register yet, has he? No, he hasn't done registration yet, so maybe we'll have a look at doing that. Getting him to do that soon. Got the change password, got the clubs. Look at it this way. Get clubs, create club, get club, update club, delete club, lots of cruddy. Join club, club teams, getting the logo for a club, creating a logo, getting a specific logo, looking at grounds, crud stuff on grounds, sponsoring grounds, events going on. Oh, lots of team stuff. Yeah, lots of crud stuff to do. I think this is definitely something we need to jump into next time. There's going to be a lot of code heavy. So I'll invite Jim again, but I'll slap him on the wrist and say, stop distracting me with you talking about OpenAPI and let's get some code built. For now, we're doing good. I'll make sure that he understands that this is how we are doing it. We're doing it JSON API spec. Don't give me any of your rubbishy stuff. Let's do this properly. So thank you. As always, stay awesome, and I will catch you next time. And next time I should have a shorter intro video. I apologize about that one. Thank you and goodbye.